It's still the morning show here on Arise News. It's now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. President Joe Biden is promising to support Israel amid fears that Tehran could launch reprisals for an attack that killed senior Iranians. Biden warns that Iran is threatening to launch a significant attack after Israel struck the Iranian consulate in Syria 10 days ago. Earlier on Wednesday, Iran's leaders said the Israeli attack in Damascus was equivalent to an attack on Iran itself. Meanwhile, an Israeli strike has killed 3 sons and a number of grandchildren of Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh. 3 sons of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh were killed in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza on Wednesday, an assassination that threatens to complicate ongoing negotiations aiming to secure a ceasefire and hostage deal. The Israeli military confirmed it carried out the attack, describing the men as 3 Hamas military operatives that conducted terrorist activity in the central Gaza Strip. The 3 were killed when the vehicle they were driving in was bombed in the Al-Shati refugee camp northwest of Gaza City, Hamas political leader Haniyeh told reporters. Haniyeh, in a statement, said killing the sons of leaders would only make Hamas more steadfast in their principles and adherence to their land. Well, there will be conflict here, Rufai, and despite the calls from the Western nations, an attack launched on Iranian embassy in Syria, even though Israel hasn't owned up to it. We take on this story.
So there are many fronts of this fight, and it's persisted for a while. Largely, America has to be blamed. Largely, the West, Britain, has to be blamed in all of this. Why? Because Rishi Sunak was still talking on LBC radio in England, and I was talking about the fact that, we'll still sell weapons to Israel. And these countries are still selling weapons to Israel. The last time I spoke about this, I spoke about the deep states that plays a role in all of this. There are still lots of Israel sympathizers in the top echelon of American politics. And Joe Biden has to follow that script. So what is happening here is Israel can go ahead and do all of this malicious harm, but Joe Biden says, I'll stick with him. And the dynamics has changed. With bombing that Iranian embassy in Damascus, what it means is that Americans are now facing reprisals on many fronts. So what are the many fronts? Hezbollah is backed up by the Hezbollah militant is backed up by Iran. Also, the Houthi rebels in Yemen. The Hezbollah group has been trying to open up another front with Israel, but Israel has been smart enough not to get into that fracas with Hezbollah because you can't be fighting on many fronts. That's one of the first doctrinations of warfare. If you fight on too many fronts, and you can go back to the days of Clausewitz and other war generals, if you fight too many fronts, it causes a lot of distraction. So with this now, the Houthis too tried to open another front, but the Americans and the West was quickly able to quell that with decimating some parts of the Houthi rebels. America says it's going to stand with Israel. Yes, it will stand with Israel because it thinks Iran might react. Iran might not totally react, but might react through proxies. That's number one dynamics. While all of this is happening, Israel is still pounding. Part of the pounding was the killing of, people from, children of the Hamas leader. I have big problems with Hamas. My problem with Hamas is legitimacy. I care more for the people in Gaza, not for Hamas, because since a couple of years, I think 2006, when they had elections last, Hamas would not allow elections happen in the Gaza Strip. And they've been ruling by force. They've been taking all the humanitarian support that has been given to Gaza, and they've been building tunnels and all of that. So my concern is not constantly about Hamas. And while they do this at the expense of the suffering people in Gaza, their own children are feeding fat and living good life in Turkey and some other parts of the world. I can't stand the hypocrisy of Hamas. But I must care for, more importantly, the children in Gaza that are being caught in the middle of the crossfire. Where are there going to be trade-offs? America is in the murky water because, to a large extent, there's been a groundswell against all of this happening, especially in the university community, the center point of intellectuals. In fact, for the very first time, I have to quote Julian Brender in the 1920s that was talking about the treason of the intellectuals, where a lot of American feels, to a very large extent, especially in the university sector, that there's been a pollution of intellectuals that would normally think in favor of Israel, but people like this are now standing up, which they are now calling treasonous. That's why you saw that the university, the former president of Harvard, black African president of Harvard, was affected from this and all of that. So there's a groundswell of ideology, and this ideology is also seeping into the mainstream media. And that's why the American government needs to be careful. Increasingly, people like Mehdi Hassan has been fired, and he has gone ahead to start up his own Zeteo, which is also pushing very strong arguments as regards the suffering of people in Gaza. So there's a lot of mainstream talk going on in America as regards the plight of people in Gaza. Will Biden be able to ride this wave over the election? And don't forget, these elections are unique because it's just like the year 2000 election where you had a third card in the person of Ralph Nader, the consumer rights activist. You have a Kennedy in this election, an independent candidate that is doing very well in the polls, that might affect the vote of Biden or the other person. So will Biden be able to reach a conclusion, or will still be taking the middle path and not be able to decisively call on Israel to stop and let's move to a ceasefire and let's bring about peace in the region? I doubt. Two things I'll say is, if this war continues up to November, then Biden will have himself to blame for what will happen in the elections.
All right.
Okay, what is the context of this story? On April 1, Israeli Defense Forces, attacked the consulate of Iran in Damascus. Persons died. 7, we were told, 12 died. And on that occasion, Iran said there will be a retaliation because they said the attack was an attack on the sovereignty of Iran or unwarranted. Now, Israel, up to this point, has not taken responsibility for it. But both Israeli officials and American officials have pointed accusing fingers at Israel as being behind the attack, because the generals that were killed were generals who had been responsible for attack on Israeli interests in the conflict, almost eternal conflict between the Middle East and Israel. Number 2, yesterday, on the occasion of the Eid al-Fitr, the Ayatollah put out a statement. Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, put out a statement reminding everybody that there will be retaliation on the basis of that April 1 attack by Israel, they conclude. So the response from President Biden is to say that, look, America's support for Israel is ironclad, and that any attack on Israel will be taken as an attack on the free world. Well, so they say, on the allies. So that's what, President Biden was saying essentially yesterday. And that's precisely the context. To also define the context further, other countries since yesterday have been evacuating their nationals from Israel because of what is now taken in international politics, international relations, as an impending attack by Iran, retaliatory attack. In fact, they are even calling it high-precision attacks. Now that President Biden says that the objective of the United States is to do all it can to protect Israel's security, the hypocrisy that we have talked about on this table, the complicity of the United States in the crisis in the Middle East has been well proven, even by President Biden himself saying so. In the context, again, defining context for proper understanding, Israel is planning to attack Rafah. Yeah, it looks like they put that on hold, with Israel, Netanyahu trying to send delegation, they not doing that and all of that. Okay, is the attack on Rafah pending? The other question to ask is that will the U.S. join Israel in retaliatory attacks. Because Netanyahu has said, yes, well, yeah, Iran, come on, let's start a fight. Attack us. We too, we are ready for you. That's the way we are now in geopolitics. So if that happens, what happens next? With the US, with what President Biden has said, will it translate into an escalation of hostilities? Lord Cameron of the United Kingdom, based on the protests by over 600 lawyers and retired justices and all of that, has now come out to say that the UK will not stop selling arms to Israel. The US has also ruled out the possibility that they will stop selling arms to Israel. So what we're dealing with is geopolitics. What we're dealing with is complicity. What we're dealing with is the ineffectuality of both the United Nations Security Council and the organs of the UN, including the International Court of Justice. What we're dealing with is a massive threat to global peace. So what we're dealing with is global leadership. All these leaders from Iran to Syria to Lebanon to United States, all of them playing ping pong with global peace. So what then? Where does that leave us with the original objectives of the United Nations? And finally, President Biden may well be playing politics, but that's a no-brainer. The far right, the conservatives in the United States, they are perpetually supporting Israel. Even if the Republicans come to power, they will say we are with Israel because of the peculiar situation of the Jewish influence in American politics.
Oh, and I'll just center on the politics of this, especially from President Joe Biden's point of view, and particularly ahead, or as we look ahead to the elections come November of this year. Now, he's in quite a tight fix because number one is America has traditionally and always been an ally of Israel. However, there have been increasing pressure, particularly because of concerns around humanitarian efforts and Israel blocking humanitarian aid to Palestinians on the Gaza Strip. Now, this conversation had come up enough for President Joe Biden a few days ago to go on a telephone call with Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. And in that telephone call, it seemed as if almost there was some policy shift if Israel didn't take a stance on protecting the lives and abiding by the rules of engagement when it comes to war. Put that side by side by the fact that he also has an election to win in terms of November. So two things. The first thing is that only yesterday or the day before, he had talked about the fact that he didn't agree with Benjamin Netanyahu's strategy or war strategy. And so he condemned it during the television interview. However, when it comes to Israel itself, then he must also be seen to be speaking against any attack or hostilities towards Israel and speaking on behalf of the American people. So very dicey. And I wonder how he would not enter into the murky waters of speaking from both sides of his mouth. Because just the day before, he had condemned the war strategy of Benjamin Netanyahu, well, in that case, Israel. And then the day afterwards, he was then talking about an ironclad support for Israel, especially on the American front. Again, it's a very difficult position for him to be because he wants to please his supporters. He wants to please the minority of Americans who are gaining a momentum in terms of calling out for his condemnation of Israel's position with the people on the Gaza Strip, especially as it regards to hostilities being rather extreme. Now, when it comes to reprisal attacks, Israeli embassies around the world have taken on an alert saying that they were prepared in the event that Iran would launch an attack following what had happened on April 1. Bear in mind that April 1 was also the same day that World Central Kitchen staff were killed, and this brought on more aggravation from the West against Israel's handling of the war. What this means is that at the end of the day, what we're looking at is Iran on its own is unable to take on Israel in terms of their military might. However, what has been postulated is that they might use smaller groups like Hezbollah through their Lebanon to launch small attacks on Israel. Again, the implication of this is that it puts paid to conversations around a ceasefire, conversations around a hostage deal, conversations around perhaps seeing the beginning of the end of this war, which a number of people might not have expected to take this long. So a difficult situation, I would say, especially for President Joe Biden, with regards to his political stance and his political future come elections in November. But Israel doesn't seem to be backing down, and it looks like Iran has now entered into the mix, and this will just make things more complicated and the war elongated. Move on to our next story this morning. President Bola Tinubu was among Muslims that observed the Eid al-Fitr prayers in Lagos. Tinubu uttered the prayers at the Obalinde prayer ground, Dodan Barracks, and joined Muslims to continue with the resilience, sacrifice and endurance that Ramadan teaches, while also assuring Nigerians of better days ahead of the country. Tokumbo Oyetunji has the details.
Islamic faithful arriving at the Dodan Barracks praying ground in Obalinde for the Eid al-Fitr prayers marking the end of this year's Ramadan. They are joined by some dignitaries including President Bola Tinubu, and by exactly 10 a.m. the clerics call everyone to order for the 2 rakat prayers led by the Chief Imam of Lagos State. The post-prayer sermon focuses on the need for actions that promote peace and harmony, as well as sustenance of the teachings of the holy month.
Today we are all celebrating Eid al-Fitr, thus marking the end of this year's Ramadan fast. Some few weeks before the commencement of this year's Ramadan, the major song all over the places was hardship, salvation, hunger, moving from state to state. The fear and the concern among the people was how to survive and observe our fast amidst the astronomical increase in food prices. Yet, with total submission to Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we raise our hands collectively to seek His blessing and succor for our land. And Alhamdulillah, Allah the provider in His infinite mercy brought ease amid hardship.
Prayers over, it is the turn of Mr. President to give his message to Nigerians.
The kind of resilience, sacrifice, endurance that we have, we should preserve that for the country. Be kind and be cheerful giver. Love our country better than any other country. That's the only one that we have. And we must continue to protect the integrity of our government and leadership.
Flowing from that, some other worshippers are also excited to share their perspectives on the completion of the religious obligation.
The watchword is to fear Allah, to continue to worship Him, to continue to glorify Him, and use those precepts of the Quran to make our nation great. Let us be our brother's keeper. It is not restricted to Ramadan alone, to give alms, to take care, to give food. It is a continuous process.
I feel fulfilled having been part of, and I feel gracious having been part of people that enjoy Allah's grace to start the Ramadan and end the Ramadan.
Ramadan is going now, or it has gone, but the religion of Islam remains. And that's the good deeds that we did during the Ramadan, which attracted enormous reward from Allah, still continues.
They are optimistic that if Muslims live by the teachings of the holy month all through the year, especially as regards how to relate with neighbors and be compassionate, then Nigeria and the world will be a better place for all. Tokumbo Oyetuji, Arise News, Lagos.
Again, it's still Eid Mubarak to all Muslim faithfuls watching. Rufai, your take on this, the president at the prayer ground.
Yeah, the president at the prayer ground called for, peace, for kindness, pretty much all that jolly Eid Mubarak to all of our Muslim brothers out there. But we always hear this every year. And have you wondered why has the wickedness increased in Nigeria? We hear all these good messages every year, but wickedness has increased. It shows you something, the heart of man being desperately wicked. So, except we purge ourselves, we can say things with our mouth, but our hearts can be very bitter and dirty. Except we purge ourselves, we constantly have a society where people are being killed, people are being hurt, all sorts of judicial killings are going on in Nigeria, and there is no rule of law and justice except we purge ourselves. And this goes to politicians out there. You see, it's not just about identifying with different religion or of the Abrahamic faith during this religious season. The question is, where is your heart? Is your heart for the betterment of people, or your heart is for your own selfish interest? And most of the time, their heart is always for their selfish interest. That's why Nigeria has constantly remained. That's why probably when we have next Eid, we'll talk about this message of goodwill and peace and kindness, but wickedness will increase, except we change ourselves. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. That's my own Eid message this morning.
Okay, I think the big message yesterday at the Eid festivals came from one, President Tinubu and former President Buhari. What were the two of them saying? Both of them were saying that Nigerians should support their leaders. President Tinubu, encapsulated it when he said, hope is what we have, and that we should have hope that tomorrow will be better. And he concluded by saying that hope is what life is all about. Because according to him, without hope, there is no life, he said. He said, without hope, there is no salvation. Look, let's tell President Tinubu straight on that the reason all of us are still here and that Nigeria is still standing is because Nigerians are still very hopeful.
Yes.
If they were not hopeful, they would have, pulled down the roof. So he says Nigerians should continue to be hopeful. And I think that is a very strong message to Nigerians. He also called for support for leaders, which was also a point that was made by former President Muhammadu Buhari, that we should continue to support our leaders so that we can, achieve the dreams, the hope that our leaders are talking about. Okay, can we just add a footnote there that our leaders also should also realize that they have to support us. It's not just about the people must support their leaders. Let the leaders also support us by leading well. If you are given a position, do it well. If you are given a position, lead well. So this is the feedback, the strong feedback that I think we can give President Tinubu and former President Buhari, that we lead well. But the major point that was made yesterday for me, in terms of all the messages, came from Mrs. Remi Tinubu, who talked about the lessons of Ramadan. And this is why wives are important too. Sometimes when the husbands don't see the road, the wives will see the road. Mrs. Remi Tinubu made the better point yesterday and said the lessons of Ramadan must go beyond the holy month. That, okay, during Ramadan, we talked about self-purification, sacrifice, forgiveness, unity, philanthropy, chastity. She said, after Ramadan, all of us should imbibe those lessons going forward. I think that is a very strong point, because Nigerians are very religious people. when every religious festival comes, they will fast, whether it's Lent, whether it is Ramadan, everybody will fast. But immediately after Ramadan, they will not behave well. So Mrs. Tinubu told us that, look, after Ramadan, behave well, be good Nigerians, be good citizens. That is the point. And that point, I hope both President Tinubu and President Buhari will remember that, important message that came significantly from the other room, to use a famous phrase.
Well, I think Mrs. Remi Tinubu has demonstrated that she will not be relegated to the other room and that she is coming from a wealth of experience, her herself having served in government at different levels in her own capacity. And like you rightly mentioned, she had talked about the importance of sustaining the lessons and the culture during the holy month of Ramadan to continue as a lifestyle. Beyond that, she used the opportunity to praise the wives, saying that, talking about their contributions to building their homes, especially looking after the family during the Ramadan season, and then also encourage the young people to move away from negative acts and channel their energy to building a better nation. So it made the right sound bite in many regards, which she has consistently done, I must say. With regards to President Bola Tinubu's speech, which we played just a few minutes ago, indeed he was speaking about patriotism, about Nigerians loving their nation, supporting the government, supporting the nation, and I believe I'm spot on in terms of both ways. Whilst he was speaking to the Nigerian people, which I think to a very large extent, Nigerians are some of the most hopeful human beings on this planet Earth, because despite all that's going on, we still wake up every morning, keep hope alive, and believe that things will get better. It's now the responsibility of governments who have been entrusted with power to ensure that they're also able to do the same thing. Love the nation, put the nation first before personal interest. This is the call that has been made a number of times. But great message right there. Religious festivals like this give an opportunity and a platform for leaders to speak a message of hope, a message of encouragement, a message to just talk to the people about doing their duties, being good, being compassionate, being generous, being kind to all. Well, move on to other news this morning. Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has offered his birthday congratulations to Africa's richest man and chairman of the Dangote Group, Aliko Dangote, who turned 67 yesterday, wishing him many more prosperous years. Chairman of Dangote Group, Alhaji Aliko Dangote, yesterday stressed that when the Dangote Petroleum Refinery becomes fully operational and starts selling diesel at significantly discounted prices, it will provide relief to Nigeria's inflation woes. On the foreign scene, U.S. President Joe Biden says he is considering Australia's request to end the persecution of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. 5 Australian women who were strip-searched and invasively examined at Doha Airport have failed in their bid to sue Qatar Airways.